Albert Chase McArthur. A lot of people cannot remember that name. And tonight we're going to talk about the drawings, the designs, and the dreams. So who would have thought that Albert Chase McArthur would come to Phoenix in 1925? He would live at Thomas Road. He would get in a Dodge automobile that his brother sold him and drive down Central Avenue and come to the second floor of the Lures building. Now this isn't his office, but this is what it looked like back in the day. Amazing what we have been through in this enterprise of building the jewel in the desert. Now, of course, I'm also a landscape architect, so I keep wondering what happened to the desert. We built a jewel in the desert. And a lot of people want to characterize the architect of the Biltmore Hotel as a competition. It's a smackdown. Ollie goes down for the count. But it's not about the fight of the champions, is it? It really, more correctly, is about leadership and cooperation. Amazing that I've been entrusted to be the conductor of so many projects. All of you have done the same, right? We can't do this alone. We live in this crazy black cape world where there's supposed to be one person. You know, Edison had like 160 engineers, took credit for everything. But, you know, it is a matter of us cooperating and working together. So this talk is more properly about what we learn from each other, and rather than the green-eyed jealousies that seem to go on. Was Frank Lloyd Wright really the architect? Frank Lloyd Wright had such a huge career, he didn't need to be the architect. Was he influential? Yes. Did he have some contributions? Yes. Albert Chase McArthur was not a student of Frank Lloyd Wright, he was an employee in the Oak Park office. He was a graduate of Armour Institute of Technology, which later on became the Illinois Institute of Technology. He went to Harvard. Wasn't a student, but everybody wants to put him down. And what brought me into this whole enterprise was a fire. I went into the ASU library in '73 and Jeff Cook said, "You have a summer job?" I said, "Yeah, I'm working for a landscape architect." So I got a better one for you. Frank Lloyd Wright Foundation's never hired anybody outside their own ranks. Go up there and interview. I went up there and interviewed with Frank Lloyd Wright's son-in-law, William Wesley Peters. They hired me on the spot. Of course, the newspaper got it wrong. This is not the front of the building, and it's not a stone building. But this copper roof was a tangled snaggle of mess on the ground. And we thought, how are we ever going to get a copper roof back on this building? They took it out for laboratory testing. Back in 1929, they couldn't smelt copper as well as they do today. It was about 14% impurities. 14% silver and gold were the impurities. Similar material. So the insurance company was happy about that. The Tallies made their money from ejector seats from military contracts. And they've diversified, started buying real estate. And May Sue Talley made this her project of interest. And she fancied herself as the interior designer, and she loved to meet with Olga Vanna Wright, and meet with all the Taliesin people. She was super involved. I met her again just a few years ago, and she was so glad to remember our summer together. So here I am. I looked even younger than 21. I was just about ready to turn 22. I'm building a model in my ASU studio here on the left. But we worked in these casitas out back. They were not touched by the fire. And we were packed in drafting tables. One of the casitas was used as a commissary. And one of the first things they had me do was design some carpets. And I thought, why carpets? It takes too long to weave them. And we have these custom designs. They pulled out drawings from the Imperial Hotel in Tokyo and said, study these, look at these, make some geometric studies from these. It was the most fantastic opportunity for a young man. I must have done 20 different designs. 6 of them were chosen to be woven. Mrs. Wright chose the colors. Susan Jacobs Lockhart chose the colors. Eloise Christa chose the colors. But I did the geometry. And who would have thought that it's the same smackdown between Albert Chase McArthur and Frank Lloyd Wright? Who designed the carpets at the Biltmore? I did. And of course, you know, the people of Sotheby's are not so happy to hear from me. I haven't heard back from them on... Would you like me to give you the Provence to 1973? No, thanks. Okay, Ling Po was somebody that A member of the audience knows. We've got one of the members, the 5 of us that were hired to put the Biltmore back together. We had a job captain named Raleigh Hall. Where's Raleigh? Stand up, Raleigh. Raleigh was the amazing guy. And of course, you know, Raleigh was about 32 at the time. He thought I was a punk kid. I didn't know anything. But I did get to work with Lincoln. Did he say he still thinks I'm a punk kid? But I got to work with Ling Po, who was a longtime draftsman and delineator and designer for Frank Lloyd Wright. Ling Po did some of those original drawings for the Baghdad Opera House that became Gamage Auditorium. But one night we were working late. We wanted to go out for Dunkin' Donuts, and I think it was Raleigh that said, "Ling, you want some Dunkin' Donuts?" And he looked up and said, "What? What is a Dunkin' Donut?" He had never been out of the house, I guess. Some Frank Lloyd Wright things that were added, I guess, in '73. You know, these silkscreen designs that we did on vinyl wall covering. The magazine cover that never got used for a magazine, but instead got used for a book cover. Well, it became a stained glass panel. Abstractions of Nature by Frank Lloyd Wright. So here we have the beautiful Arizona Biltmore Hotel. It opened in February. It closed in July because of the heat, and then the stock market crash came. So wow, not much of an opening. And oddly enough, Albert Chase McArthur put some, is it Monet, is it Matisse? What do we got here? Got some water lilies happening here. Was the canal? What was they thinking here? But this is really a journey of a family from Iowa to Chicago to Phoenix. The McArthurs. And the old man made the money with an industrial lamp that everyone needed to have. And really had a tremendous amount of salesmanship, huge reach. His partner was Edward Boynton, who we're going to hear a little bit later. But he was able to give each of his 3 sons quite a tidy sum of money so they could get their start in Phoenix. One of these houses was designed by Frank Lloyd Wright. Oh, wait a minute, they're both by Frank Lloyd Wright. Who would have thought that a 25-year-old Frank Lloyd Wright would do a Palladian colonial house, the George Blossom residence, but did a gambrel roof barn Dutch colonial house? But, you know, there's more there than you might think. 25-year-old Frank Lloyd Wright was working with all kinds of craftsmen at Adler and Sullivan in Chicago, and the Chicago Auditorium, all these wonderful people in Chicago that had the ability to do beautiful brickwork and do great ironwork. So here we have what looks like a rather conventional house. But in fact, a lot of craftsmen worked on this. Beautiful stained glass inside, not done by young Frank Lloyd Wright, done by these other craftsmen. How interesting to have a Frank Lloyd Wright house next door to you, but then have a Queen Anne on the other side. What a beautiful turret, you know. It's a great, great Chicago house. And you'll notice on the corners there are octagonal bay windows that are held up by Roman brick. But beautiful, beautiful woodwork. So Albert Chase McArthur grew up with all these neat things around him. And his 2 brothers did as well. So you can see these unusual bay windows on the corners. And they looked really fun on the inside. You can see the Roman brick that is cantilevered to hold them up. So what a crazy time, 1893. Electricity was brand new. There was more electricity in the Chicago World's Exposition than there was in the city of Chicago. Alternating current came to town. The 12-year-old Albert Chase McArthur goes and sees the wonders of the day. And George Ferris, they named something after him. The Ferris wheel. Who would put Pullman cars on a wheel? They'd never done anything like this. I think the axle on that Ferris wheel was something like 12 tons. They never raised 12 tons that height in history ever before. Look at the wooden falsework that it took to build a steel Ferris wheel and the Pullman cars attached. Crazy. So Albert Chase McArthur is a very skilled, very educated, very diverse guy. Studied metaphysics. I mean, what would a guy that would design this room be doing with metaphysics? Are we in another world almost? This is almost unbelievable to be in. We're in a room 91 years old, and yet it just feels so otherworldly in a way. I call the Dream Team the group that he worked with in 1907. And Wright was no fool. He hired the best people. Marion Mahoney was really one of the best architects around, and she worked with him very, very closely. Younger brother Warren, 4 years younger, another blue ribbon educated guy, went to Cornell and followed in his father's footsteps with inventions, received a patent on a lamp, designed tubular furniture that was really a big deal. You can look on the internet. Warren McArthur furniture is selling for $4,000 a piece to this day. So a very talented family, the McArthurs. Beautiful, interesting furniture. Tubular aluminum wasn't really thought about in the 30s much. Matter of fact, what did we learn from each other? Lessons learned. Did Frank Lloyd Wright learn from the McArthurs? Maybe it was the other way around, huh? Where did this chair come from? And of course, Wright's chair with the 3 wheels, reporter said to him, "What the heck are you doing? That's the most dangerous chair you could possibly have. 3 wheels, you can break your neck on it." And Frank Lloyd Wright said, "Well, when you're sitting in it, it's really a 5-legged chair." The third brother, Charles, was very active in business, 9 years younger. When he died, he was fiddling with an electric car. He had invented an electric golf cart. Barry Goldwater wanted to build a monument to Charles McArthur. So was Albert Chase McArthur a prairie-style architect? Well, this drawing certainly looks like it. He was a wonderful perspectivist. And I don't know if you can see here, but he had a funny way of arranging rectangular columns into a rotunda, into the round. So where did the prairie style begin? Well, it began with the 18. Some of you have heard about the 18. They got together in Steinway Hall. Frank Lloyd Wright was maturing and becoming a leader of the prairie style group, but he hired Marion Mahoney. We think of Mahoney because we know Lesher and Mahoney, but I guess her name was really Mahoney. And she was so talented that she went to MIT. I think she was the first woman licensed in Illinois. Illinois had a Practice Act that came in around 1898. Wright refused to ever get a license, but he hired licensed architects. There's a piece of irony for you. But this is a wonderful book. If you ever have a chance to look at this book, David Van Zanten has done a great job with copious footnotes. It's a very detailed study of that time in our American history where we were inventing a new architecture. Here's the addition that Wright put on his house when he got a little money ahead. Marion Mahoney did this wonderful drawing. The studio was on the left, the library is on the right. Entrance is in the middle. A lot of you have probably been there. Well, how do you get the dream team packed into one drafting room? Here on the left you can see that they're packed in there like sardines. Can you imagine having the luxury in 1907, Albert Chase McArthur comes into this office, he's working with talented people. It's a beautiful studio. There's no phone, there's no interruptions, there's no radio, there's no fax. We just get to draw. I'm the people that love to draw. Fantastic what they did. They really created a whole new American architecture. So this is the style of drawing that so many people say, that's a Frank Lloyd Wright drawing, right? We identify that with Frank Lloyd Wright. Well, that's a Marion Mahoney drawing. And it turns out that Marion Mahoney influenced so many other people. Matter of fact, Rainer Banham said that she was the greatest delineator of the 20th century. And a lot of what I'm going to tell you tonight is hung on this quote. Here comes John Lloyd Wright in 1992. He says, there's 7 people in the office. I mean, this is why I get to call them the dream team. There's 7 people in the office that really made this work. They were the ones that designed the Roby House. They were the ones that did the Dana House. These are the people. You know, Frank Lloyd Wright was talking to women's groups, and he had a lover that he was seeing almost every day, Nima Cheney. And he was riding his horse, if you read his autobiography. So, you know, at 40 years old, he was about ready to do what his dad had done. Wright's father, at 40 years old, walked out and abandoned the family. And when Wright was 40 years old, he walked out on a wife and 6 kids and went with Nima Cheney to Europe. And a lot of these people on the dream team carried on with the prairie style. Here we are with a 1949 building. And if anybody knows about Frank Barry Byrne or Francis Barry Byrne, what a fantastic architect. Beautiful drawings. So this Frank Lloyd Wright style that we talk about was not really firmed up by Marion Mahoney until 1906. And they went back to 1892 and redrew the Winslow house in this style. It was not originally done that way. So a lot of the stuff has been redrawn. A lot of it was redrawn from photographs. No wonder these perspectives were so good. Now some of you know about the Millard house in Pasadena. Well, this is the first house that Wright had done. This was under construction when Albert Chase McArthur joined the firm. This is one that was in the office when Albert Chase was there. And it's interesting to kind of see that the hip roofs come down to a flattened kind of area like the Dana House did. We'll see this later in Albert Chase McArthur's work. Isabel Roberts was one of the women in the firm. She was mostly known as a bookkeeper, but darn it, she was really good. She was a stained glass designer. She went off and got licensed in Florida, made a name for herself in Florida. But Isabel Roberts was an amazing member of this group, and history kind of gave her a back seat, but it's coming out more and more that she was heavily involved in creating the genius of Oak Park. So when Albert Chase McArthur was 27, could he have possibly brought the Boynton residence into the office? It was his dad's partner, so that would kind of help you, right? Bring in a residential project. And here's the Edward Boynton house in New York. This is the farthest east that any prairie-style house was ever built. And it kind of reminds me of the Roby house in a way. It kind of has that ship-like character and the two-story feeling. And of course, this is the rendering, or this is the perspective that we always think about for the Roby house. So Wright had left for Europe when this was under construction. So it was up to others to make those decisions in the field and to follow the course. And it's interesting, again, how we talk about the medium is the message, right? Doesn't this look like a railroad station at the bottom? Isn't it funny how a flat-on elevation of one of those famous houses doesn't look that interesting? You almost need it to be in that perspective. And yet, no perspective was ever done by Marion Maoni. But the excitement in the office at the time was that there was a German publisher that wanted to publish the work of Frank Lloyd Wright. His name was Wasmuth in Berlin. And so they were quickly trying to get all the drawings together to go to Berlin. And that's one reason why Wright left. Not only to run off with the lover, but let's go see Mr. Wasmuth in Berlin. He's going to make me famous. The first published collection of Wright drawings. So here's how they drew the Roby house in the Wasmuth edition. I don't think this was constructed with station points. I don't think this was a constructed perspective. This is one taken from photographs, right? We don't hover above the house like this very often. But apparently it was Marion Maoni that started this whole thing about having the plan, having the elevation, having the section, having the perspective all on one sheet. And they evolved that over time where even in 1929 they were still redrawing Frank Lloyd Wright's work. Here's the 1904 Larkin building, redrawn to look more modern. Well, it was so exciting when the work came out and was published in Berlin, the Wasmuth, 1910. There was an architect in Berlin named Peter Behrens that was so excited about this that he shut down the office. He closed the office, he sent everybody home, and he kept his three best apprentices. The guy on the left is a young Le Corbusier. The guy in the middle is a young Walter Gropius. On the right, Mies van der Rohe. Wow, those three employees, oh, these were students of his? No, I'm sorry. These are staff members. I'm not going to put them down. These are staff members that went on to do great things in Peter Behrens' office. So that's how important the Wasmuth edition was. That's how important these drawings were, how influential they were. But like I said, later on, one of Wright's assistants, Heinrich Klum, showed Mr. Wright, hey, I can make your buildings look a whole lot more modern. Give him that orthochromatic approach. And funny how CAD is so soulless. I mean, this CAD perspective of the Roby house is kind of nice, but isn't it funny how you just can't quite get there? Well, toward the end of his employ, Albert Chase McArthur worked on a bank and was also a hotel. So this might be the first hotel that Albert Chase McArthur ever worked on. And it's kind of neat to see the two wings in prairie style coming out of the hotel. We'll see that in some of Albert Chase McArthur's later work. Beautiful, beautiful one-point perspective of the bank on the left. And of course the ornamental columns that Wright is well known for. Well, it's something Albert Chase McArthur picked up on. This is a blueprint from the ASU archives, and it's right here on the 4th floor of the Biltmore Hotel. Looking wonderful. Okay, here's the lover, May Mancini. Did a house with the missus and her husband clear back in 1904, I think it was. So in locking up the office, suddenly these people were out of work. So Albert Chase McArthur went to work for a Chicago architect for a while. Then he decided to go and study architecture in Italy. And then he went to Vienna. And that's where he met his wife, Erna. What a brilliant woman she was. I think she spoke about 5 languages. When the Great Depression came and the McArthur family left Arizona, Albert Chase McArthur went to Los Angeles, and Erna was able to help the family get through the Depression by teaching languages. Architecture was indeed in the Great Depression, but languages were. Fantastic design that McArthur did. So what did McArthur see? What did Albert Chase McArthur study? Well, obviously the great Joseph Maria Olbrich and the Secessionists. If you don't know history, secession is another name for Art Nouveau. These were the Vienna Art Nouveau people. And Olbrich was one of the greatest of their designers. Had a great career and died at age 40. Amazing guy. But of course, Albert Chase McArthur was familiar with this kind of massing because he saw the Unity Temple under construction. So how would that be neat to be a 25-year-old kid in Frank Lloyd Wright's office, take a lunch break down to Unity Temple and see how the construction's going? And I guess this was the first building in America of exposed concrete. So here we go with exposed concrete. Where did he learn it? Maybe way back when. So this massing was familiar to him for sure. But also these details, that he would have seen the details on the Dana house to the right in copper. Or even this checkerboard look in the lower left-hand corner of Olbrich's work in Vienna. A lot of Art Nouveau influences, but here we are with Art Nouveau moving toward Art Deco. All of a sudden, all these sinuous curves are now turning into geometric shapes. And so Albert Chase McArthur was exposed to a lot of this secessionist design. So now he's back in Chicago. He's got a partner, Arthur Coffin. They're doing big industrial buildings. Well, you can see that this grand arch is paying homage to Louis Sullivan, to Frank Lloyd Wright. It all comes from that same source. Matter of fact, who was the best champion of that? I guess it all started with H.H. Richardson. Got to get my hometown in there. Louis Sullivan did a beautiful arch in Pueblo, Colorado in 1890. I don't think you can beat the Hurtley residence. Everybody loves the Hurtley residence. That arch is a killer good. But then here's McArthur doing a beautiful, beautiful building with his partner Coffin. I see a little bit of Biltmore here. Do you see a little bit of a silhouette or a little bit of a feeling? How interesting that this factory, done so long ago in 1912. And I see here that the reference is Mr. Bosmuth is in the publishing business again. So how funny that Bosmuth got involved with McArthur. This is one that Doug Sidner and I couldn't make out too much in the boxes of information stored, but we thought it was a really amazing perspective. It shows his mastery of industrial type architecture with flat concrete slabs, board in place columns, all the engineering of concrete structures that you'd have to undertake at the time. And here's a very interesting water tower, which has, I guess, a certain, what would you say, was it, you kind of feel like the Larkin building maybe? Don't know. You see some influences there. Albert Chase McArthur was involved with his profession. He showed up for this meeting in Chicago. It's funny the things that I found about McArthur. They cared enough about the future of the profession to be involved in that as well. And then in 1910, his brothers come to Phoenix. They start the Dodge dealership. I guess the Dodge people were selling parts to Ford up until 1914. They had a whole bunch of parts. They said, let's make our own car. So 1914, the Dodge automobile came out. They converted one of them into a bus. And to encourage the selling of Dodge automobiles, they toured around Arizona, going to the Grand Canyon in the Dodge Wonder Bus. They did start the first radio station. It was KFAD, and then later finally became KTAR. So yeah, you'll see a lot about the McArthur family. kind of a curious name for Piestowa Peak back in the day. I guess that was kind of, you just accept it, I guess. So here we are back at the Flossmoor Country Club. A pretty interesting floor plan. Asymmetrical, kind of like Arizona Biltmore floor plan. And now you kind of correlate between the perspective and the plan, where you can see that rotunda type shaped room that's formulated through rectangular columns. So he went on in 1915 to do some innovative things. Anybody in the room ever worked with Jalousie windows? Am I even pronouncing that right?
Jalousie.
There's a Florida thing, right?
Yeah.
Here they are. He's got glass block above Jalouse. That's a really interesting way to fenestrate a room, right? And this is just like a year after Bruno Taut did the glass pavilion. Did he see that? Was he influenced by it? That's kind of crazy good. Goodness knows what this is. We got, Harold was not able to give us any information. He's holding out on us, man. Where's the information on this one? We got neat drawings. I guess the McArthur family kept as much as they could, but during the Great Depression, it was in a basement in Los Angeles. Things got burned. So, that's why we're here tonight. We want your stuff. We want your history. This is a fun one. He was still in Chicago. His offices were now on LaSalle Street, but I guess his brothers were doing development work with the Hurd Development Company. And so he designed this little house. I don't know what the snow-capped peaks on the far right are trying to tell me. I guess in Chicago they thought it might still snow. I don't know. But the image on the left, upper left-hand corner, hey, there's a sleeping porch. I guess the Chicago guy was smarter than we thought. 1925, he's now in Phoenix, working in the Lures building. He does this tourist hotel in Tucson. See, the McArthur family had a neat idea. We're going to have a hotel up in Flagstaff, and we'll use the hotel staff there for the summer. And then when the winter comes, that hotel staff will move down to Tucson, and we'll have them there in the winter, and they'll go back and forth. And that was the plan that they had for the Biltmore. So this is a pretty interesting 1925 design. And there's some arches here, but there's some flat spaces. And again, the articulation or alliteration of bay spacing is something we see a lot in McArthur's work. But what did Phoenix look like in 1925? You can see Central Avenue kind of stops and goes right into the riverbed there. It just was an amazing town at the time. Jeff, what did you say? There was like 9,000 people? 11,000 people. Crazy. So here's a house that Albert does for his brother, Charles. It looks very much like an industrial plant. It's got rooftop gardens, though, which are interesting. But I spent a lot of time trying to make sense out of this, like, what is going on inside this house? I found a rather beautiful drawing of the Lures building that I just had to share. But again, think about what it would be like to be an architect on the second floor of the Lures building. This is a pretty fun little house. And it kind of has some of that Mayan decoration. I don't know, with this Biltmore block thing sort of starting here. Up there at the top of the parapet? Is that the Chicago guy's way of adding some Southwestern charm, maybe? Who knows? And this one is one of the finest ever. This is one that's a hidden gem. Beautiful house, still in Phoenix, photographs beautifully. Was this one of the first international style buildings? 1926 was pretty early to be doing a white parapeted building with those blue Vienna tiles. Love the old red tiles. Influence of Vienna. And it was published in Architectural Record. Albert Chase McArthur had a building published in Record before the Biltmore was published in Record. That's pretty cool. And yet the real definition of modern international style architecture was many years to come. The big exhibition in 1932. So here again, we learn from each other. 1926, an amazing house in California with amazing cantilevers. And Frank Lloyd Wright always said his idea behind Falling Water was to beat the internationalists at their own game. And he did. He just did an amazing house. But he was so sick about hearing about the internationalists that he decided he was going to take a shot at it. But I think he learned from Schindler. He was out in California in the 20s. This is one of Don Ryden's most famous photographs. You know, it's like, is this a vintage automobile with a modern building? What's going on here? No, this is a brand new Mercedes automobile in 1929. Mercedes thought that they would make their automobile look modern and up to date if they put it with a building of the Weissenhof Siedlung. It looks the other way around. What a crazy thing. But it was an amazing time in 1927, as Jerry Davis knows, right? What happened to 27 Beyond this? Sacco and Vincetti? You're the one that gave me that book on 27. It was a crazy time in America. Lucky Lindy, the wonders of the day, right? And Art Deco was starting to take over. Art Deco was abstractions of nature in some cases. But you know, Albert Chase McArthur's drawing in the lower right fits right in, doesn't it? So here's a hotel project that never got built in 1926. So he was a busy architect in Phoenix. And I think you can see some of the Art Deco influences there. Matter of fact, it was in 1931 that Lesher and Mahoney got a beautiful Art Deco building built. I love the elevators in there. John, what's it called now? What's the lofts?
Orchid Loft.
There you go. The Arizona Gazette building. We couldn't find anything in the Arizona Gazette about this, even though it was their building. There's more to learn about what McArthur was doing at that time. I love this hotel plan. This is a wonderful hotel plan for Casa Grande. Now some people, even the family, thought this was a diversionary plan where they were trying to get land speculators confused. Because they knew as soon as they announced the Biltmore there'd be land speculation, so they had diversionary programs out there. But John on our committee was able, John Jackmar was able to research that this was a real development, and Chicago investors planted thousands of palm trees. La Palma was a reality, and there was even going to be a railroad stop at La Palma. This hotel never got built, but how neat that again, you know, Albert Chase McArthur organizes things in interesting ways with geometry. There's that round room, you know, some kind of a entrance hall. But it's interesting to compare the more or less symmetrical La Palma with the asymmetrical Biltmore. Kind of an octagonal courtyard versus a hexagonal courtyard. And of course, a lot of people thought that Biltmore was named after Cornelius Vanderbilt's mansion, but no, it was named after the Biltmore hotel chain. And the McArthur family thought they would do well to have their hotel affiliated with the famous hotel chain, so they paid $10,000 to use the Biltmore name. Here's an early study. I call it the octo study because the courtyard is an octagon. And you can see that there's some kind of a baldacchino at the end there, some kind of a raised up tower element. You can see it's more of a symmetrical entrance plaza. And at the very entry, you can kind of see these rectangular things. They remind me of what he'd done for Tucson a few years before. This one's also an early study where it looks like the hexagonal courtyard of the Biltmore Hotel is an amphitheater. That's pretty cool. And then, I don't know what's going down here at the bottom, but it kind of looks like we've got those impressionistic water lilies going on again. And then there's a structure there. Could there be water going underneath? You see what I'm talking about here? I mean, what was the intent here? So I colored it in. I thought, what the heck? You know, I mean, this is James having some fun here. With, you know, the landscape architect having fun with two colors, but it just might be. There was a negative edge waterfall at one point. So McArthur wrote to Frank Lloyd Wright in December of 1927 because the attorneys wanted a release on the use of the block system. And they paid Wright $10,000. And for some of you, you got the blue sheet that's here on your chair. I got that from Warren McArthur III more than 20 years ago. So it's kind of a fun collector item to see some of the legalese that went with this whole transaction. But of course, when they found out after 12 weeks that Wright didn't have a patent, they just dismissed him. He wasn't really helping out that much anyway. He was going off to see Dr. Alexander Chandler out in the East, so he wasn't that great of an employee apparently. But they did They did put him and his girlfriend, he was married to Miriam Noel at the time, but they put Frank Lloyd Wright and Olga Ivana Milanov in a country club home right on the fairway. And they even, you know,
next to it.
amazing, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then knock that down.
The history. We're losing our history, right? Okay, so this is the drawing, the isometric of the block system. It's fascinating to see how little concrete was being discussed in terms of a foundation, just the most modicum of a turn down here. I would imagine a lot of the concrete was mixed by hand up here in 1929 too. But there's an interesting little signature down here in the corner, and it kind of fits up with the family history. They said before Wright left that he executed his signature down in the corner, and I put it against his other signature on the contract, and it's like not quite the same, but okay, maybe. So Wright leaves after just 12 weeks, and he's got to go to a San Diego or La Jolla, California court. Why in the heck his second wife became Miriam Lloyd? I don't know, maybe he asked her to change her middle name too. But he had to go face the court. So there's a lot written about this. It's an interesting, fascinating sidebar to the whole story. But it was that time that he met Dr. Alexander Chandler. And gosh darn it, this group here 40 years ago did this brochure. Here we are 40 years later. But I'd worked on that Frank Lloyd Wright brochure there in 1978. So it's funny that we've been doing this for a long time, taking a look at our history. But of course, Wright had to condemn the finished project. You know, turned out worse than I thought it would. So construction drawings continued through May. You can see the dates on the drawings and so forth, but construction did begin in August. You can see that the gold room was only about 5/8 the size that it is today. It's got a funny little Roby house kind of window here at the end of it, so you see a lot of geometric influences. And here we go with industrial architecture from Chicago, right? Columns, beams, floor slabs, reinforcing. Wright was really mad about it. He said, these things should be load-bearing blocks. Well, you know, Albert Chase McArthur was probably thinking about this being a brick building from Phoenix Brickyard at one point. I mean, they took a big leap of faith to say, let's make our own building material. Who's doing that? We'll buy bags of Portland cement and mix it with sand. We'll make our own building material. So whether it was brick infill, whether it was concrete block infill, not structural for a 4-story building, but Wright wanted it to be structural. And the casitas were. So he was saying, hey, should have had more casitas. But I spent hours and hours studying this master section, you know, where floor slabs were thickened up to take the textile block system. Pretty interesting to study through it, you know, how much care and trouble went into this building. And again, tremendous amounts of wood and false work. It's just amazing how one-buy materials were used constantly to build scaffold, build ladders, brace things. Pretty amazing construction. You can see that the textile blocks are coffered to keep them light. So coffering the blocks helped in terms of material. And then this is one of the most difficult things to explain. I'm almost going to have you read it yourself, because how do you become this mathematician that decides that you could assign harmonies of light frequencies and colors and work out mathematical equations that you could relate sound tones to a specific color or light frequency? Okay, metaphysics, I don't know. It's part of what he studied at Harvard, but I see the upper right-hand corner as being a sound wave that's heading up and a yellow one that's coming down, so I see the intersection of sound waves. It wasn't a cross-section of a palm tree and all this other malarkey that's out there. But I guess he was really trying to use his interest in music and mathematics. And what did he write here? These ignore the possibility of considering a scale of values for each color. So he was constantly tinkering and thinking. I got a saxophone player friend here whose eyebrows just went up when he heard that. But it was a beautiful design, and it's intrigued people and created a lot of thought and imagination. This is a drawing I did on the left to try and describe the system. Now these blocks had to be cured out of the sun, and so I have the suspicion that this huge tent here in the middle of the courtyard was to cure the blocks. It doesn't look like they were used for offices. But for them to build this in 6 months, crazy.
Wow.
Now it was published in Architectural Record magazine, and it was said that this was Albert Chase McArthur's very own signature block. And I've looked for years, I've never been able to find it anywhere on the property. So keep looking, help me. I'll offer a bounty for it. Well, it was about 1930 that Wright wrote a letter letting everyone know that Albert Chase McArthur was truly the architect. But it went on for years and years. In this blue 11 by 17 that some of you have, it talks about how not only would Wright turn in this letter, but then later on he'd be saying, oh, well, we know who really designed the hotel. So it just never ended, and it's just really probably very hard for Albert Chase McArthur because it was I don't think he believed this was going to be the last thing he ever did when the crash of 29 came, right? We just never know. But there used to be desert around the Jewel of the Desert. We used to have amazing saguaros. They worked very hard to keep the desert here. I love this one because it shows the original carpet design. And look at these ashtrays. You see these metal ashtrays? There's a couple different ones here. Designed by Albert Chase McArthur. Well, now they're being sold for $20,000. Now I feel like my carpet isn't worth nearly that. How come my carpet's only worth $3,800? So you can see them here. This is the 1929 architectural record showing the different Albert Chase McArthur furniture designs. The mystery room and the railing design. You'll see furniture around here that has this motif on it. So, lessons learned from each other. Desert dreams. McArthur family had desert dreams, but so did Dr. Alexander Chandler. I would think that Wright was kind of feeling like, hey, that should have been my hotel that got built. What happened to mine in Chandler? That beautiful, beautiful San Marcos in the desert. But the understanding of winter resort living and celebrating the beauty of the Sonoran Desert. Product design, Albert Chase McArthur didn't do much, but we have this marvelous set of china that he designed. It was so fun to see this in the archives. And everybody knows the famous coffee cup that Wright designed so women with red lipstick wouldn't leave the red lipstick on the cup. That's always a very famous coffee cup story. Who was better at the unit block system? Well, I'll let you decide. I think Albert Chase McArthur turned corners with his Lego building system pretty well. But the Millard House, pretty exciting also. Working with allied craftsmen. You can't do it alone. We have to work together. Albert Chase McArthur probably worked on the Roby House stained glass. And you can see that he's done rather well with his own designs in 1916. Did Frank Lloyd Wright copy the roof from the Biltmore Hotel? It's 30 years later, we're in Texas now. Okay, it's a great shape, it's a great system, right? Could this have been the first building in Arizona with a copper roof? It was almost unheard of in 1929. Like, you're going to put a what? You're going to put a copper roof? Okay. Working with allied craftsmen again. Did anybody know that Emery Kopka was involved in the Biltmore block design? He was the sculptor that did the Kachina Fountain at Old Main at ASU. If you go into the ASU Music Building, there's an Emery Kopka sculpture there on the campus. So Albert Chase McArthur was very quick to give credit to the people around that helped. How about the hanging staircase? That's a brilliant thing here in the Biltmore. Did you ever notice that we have this wrought iron rods that hang the concrete stairs? Beautiful, beautiful thing. The ones that Falling Water finally failed. You can see that they had to thicken up the corners and add new steel angles because they were too slender. But I think they influenced each other. We help each other. We learn from each other. We admire each other. It's not a smackdown. It's not a championship fight. So you've been very patient. I never thought I'd get through this many slides. You've been wonderful to talk with. Thank you very much.